All right, my lovelies, it's your girl, the Risk Goddess, Queen Capricorn herself, the Georgia Peach. Welcome to Empress Goddess Presents Manly P. Hall, Fishers of Men.
Gods, and thus came into existence as group of festivals or of ceremonies, rituals, and rites, which have continued down to us from one culture to another. In the course of time, we have altered these days as to their meaning and the events which they celebrated. But the habit or practice of preserving these great festival days has not to any measure altered or changed. I think the interesting point of symbolism is that the Egyptians held that the great principles of nature and of heaven were assigned to these days as the birthdays of deities. This meant that the gods were not born in any year, were not born in any temporal calendar whatsoever, and were thus properly represented as beings of eternity, outside of our general concept of time. The timelessness of these deities was thus symbolically established, and the worship of them was held to be beyond the ordinary concerns of men who measured their barter and trade and their months and years by an ordinary calendar. This universality of a concept tells us something that is useful to us even in our present generation, namely that there are principles beyond time. There are principles beyond our measurement or estimation, and there are beings and powers in nature which cannot be captured within our concepts of time and place. These eternal principles were anciently venerated, and we seek to perpetuate in our way the principles for which these eternal powers were the most primitive and antique symbols. Of these great and mysterious days set aside for the worship of truth in all of its phases and aspects, that which we refer to now as Christmas was an ancient and accepted festival, sometimes referred to as the birthday of the sun god. This worship of these days has a number of meanings. Perhaps we can explore a few of them in terms of their present utility. Let us not, therefore, devote too much time to historical factors or to the eternal conflicts of human belief, but strive to find what these ceremonies can mean to us as thoughtful persons living in our present century and generation. In the first place, the trend in modern thinking, particularly on the level of social psychology, is the re-evaluation of what might be termed the idea and ideal archetypes of humanity. There are great thoughts that we share, thoughts that have been often obscured in times of benightedness, but have been restored in emergency and under periods of great stress and pressure, by which we have been forced back into the recognition of basic value. We are being so forced today by circumstances that weigh heavy upon us. The great problem of our generation is confusion, and confusion is something under which the average person cannot function adequately. To meet the challenge of confusion, we instinctively seek value. We strive once more to discover essential landmarks. We seek road marks and guides by means of which we can continue a reasonable course even under the pressure of unreasonable conditions. In this search for value, basic archetypal pattern, it has been observed from the beginning of our experience as human beings that we have always sought consolation and value on the level of basic idea, basic principle. Our only hope has always been that there is a universal truth, that there is a power at the source and root of existence, which is honorable, true, right, good. Without this basic conviction, no civilization has ever been able to restore itself or raise itself above a comparatively savage state. As this conviction has grown dim, cultures have failed. And in every instance, a new culture springing into existence has attained its vitality by restoring this concept of truth, of an eternal principle of reality, toward which we must turn and to which we must periodically rededicate our lives. In order that such dedication may exist, all peoples have set aside days for the celebration of principles. These principles may be either abstract, religious, spiritual, or the manifestation of this power or these powers in the persons of heroes or in circumstances by which we feel that we can recall or revitalize important occasions based in this truth concept. In our own Western way of life, for example, we have not only sacred holidays, but also secular holidays. In all cases, however, the secular holiday is in some way an extension of an ideal or a principle into our daily life. When we celebrate, for example, the declaration of our independence on the 4th of July, we are really celebrating a principle by means of which our nation was brought into fortunate existence. We are celebrating the unselfishness, the dedication, the courage of our forefathers. We are celebrating their strength in right, as it was given to them to understand the right. And we celebrate this day because we believe it was a day that was lawful, that it was right in nature and right in spirit, and that those who helped to bring it about exemplified in their conduct the very principles which we most deeply admire. Thanksgiving is another day in which we recognize the importance of gratitude, which is an aspect of truth. We attempt to express this symbolically through restoring a vision of gratitude and to be restated within our own natures as a fact to give us encouragement and hope for the years that lie ahead. We celebrate the birthdays of our great heroes as Washington and Lincoln. We celebrate the sacrifice of our young men in war and in death in order to preserve the principles which we hold sacred. We celebrate the rights of labor. We celebrate the New Year. And we keep all of these festivals because in them we find symbolic monuments of principles that we affirm to be right and proper. Thus, even our secular occasions have about them a certain sacredness, because they again are merely our way of recognizing the workings of the law in nature and in human nature. And gradually we elevate to recognition, respect, even almost worship, those in whose lives truth has been the guiding and leading power. Thus, regardless of our confusions and our insecurities, we inwardly recognize that we are under the sovereignty of a pattern, a plan, a purpose that is essentially right. We also recognize that this purpose is continually obscured in the courses of our daily actions. We recognize our own limitations, and we realize that our selfishness, short-sightedness, and materiality may in many instances deprive these festivals of their deeper significance. Yet we also know that as individuals, we have the right to call forth out of ourselves whatever degree of understanding we may possess, and therefore that we cannot actually affirm that the profaning of a holiday makes it necessary for us to profane it. That the fact that others do not understand is no excuse why we should condemn either the event or even perhaps those who exploit the event. It is for us as persons to seek our securities by the restatement of our own understanding. And regardless of the direction or course of empire, each individual has the right to seek within, in quietude, in peace, and in gratitude, for the source of life, and the source of strength, the source of value in this troubled world. Modern thinkers are beginning to realize that in the prosaic attitudes which they have held, in their general disregard for this sensitivity in man, they have worked a hardship upon human nature. That in the attempt to impose a blanket materialism upon life, they have deprived man of values which are necessary to him. It may not be well to say that they have actually deprived us of these values, because we cannot be deprived of them any more than we can be deprived of life itself and still survive. Yet we have gradually come to interpret out of these events the solemnity and meaning which they held, until today our festivals become almost a burden upon our flesh. We no longer sense the possibility, the need, and the reality of these important occasions. It is often true that under the pressure of events, our spiritual insight is not always available to us. And just as surely as we need a vacation every year, or we need that annual medical checkup, or we need a certain reunion with our friends and families, so also we need periodically the spiritual remedy of the restatement of our faiths. This restatement is made convenient for us, easy and comparatively simple, by these festivals which set aside times particularly proper and appropriate for such restatement. We may sometimes believe with the scoffer that it is sad indeed that we have to have one Mother's Day a year, that we cannot make our understanding and our appreciation stretch over the whole year. Actually, however, if in that day of recognition we have a deep experience of value, we shall find that our attitudes do stretch better, that we will be able to carry a certain lingering remembrance through the entire year. Therefore, these periods of restatement are not the substitution for a good life. They are continual restatements of the reason for a good life. They help us to have courage to face each coming day with greater internal personal resource. Thus, as we look around us all over the world and observe these archetypal days, we realize that they rise primarily from the archetype in ourselves, which in turn is based upon a universal pattern. Man could not have these rhythms of motion in his own consciousness if this consciousness was not rooted in a universal rhythm. The fact that we instinctively perform certain actions will in itself testify to the validity of the motivation behind the more noble and beautiful of these actions. They arise out of something beyond ourselves. And I think we cannot say that we merely copy these habits from each other. because somewhere in the dim source of things there was nothing to copy from. And yet man still, out of his own nature and out of his own instincts, created these patterns. Today, in various primitive parts of the world where civilization or even organized religion have scarcely penetrated, these festivals are observed and have been since the dawn of time among the most isolated and remote cultural groups. Thus, they represent a spontaneous release from ourselves. And I think this morning we are concerned primarily with one of these forms of internal release. The release of something which perhaps we do not fully appreciate or understand, but which challenges us and causes us to sense the overimportance. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why we resent the profaning of these days, why we are peculiarly disillusioned when human beings seemingly exploit these most tender and most profound instincts of our lives. Yet this very exploitation may help us, because it will help us to restore the value which seemingly disappears. And in our rebellion against exploitation, we may clarify the essential principle and restore it in our own natures and in our own souls. Christianity, as the religion of Western man, has always been rich in festivals. In fact, the calendar of Christian festivals includes in some part of Christendom practically every day of the year. In many nations, there are more religious festivals than we observe. And in many parts of the world, a major religious festival may be said to occur at least once weekly. In some places, even oftener. Most of these festivals are, as in the case of secular celebrations, either surrounding spiritual convictions or else in recognition of the achievement of human beings themselves, who have attained extraordinary sanctity by their way of life and have thus become worthy of veneration, and perhaps through the great machinery of the ancient church were actually raised to sainthood or to some position approximate to the nature of a divine being. All of these various festivals have their importance in moderating and directing the conduct of persons who must live largely by the glorification of example, who must gain their own courage from the realization that other persons have kept faith even under the most harrowing conditions. So each of these festivals reminds us of a virtue, reminds us of some quality or some person in whom value has been very clearly and definitely expressed. As these festivals disappear or retire from among us, we lose, therefore, a certain foundation in principles, and we begin to substitute the mere celebration of external situations. We begin to use these days merely as days of leisure, or perhaps as excuses for some kind of secular festivity. To this degree, we have lost an inner contact. Perhaps this contact does remain subconsciously in us, but it is not as available as it should be for the end which it is most intended to attain, namely a re-encouragement of ourselves, a recognition or restoration of hope, of faith, of love, of friendship, and of understanding. Let it not be said, however, that the profaning of these days can interfere with this. It will interfere only...
I'm sorry, y'all. I got something that just came up. I got to run off for a minute. A little emergency came up, family emergency. So I'll finish doing this another time.